Okay, welcome to this next video in our Android Development Starter course. So in this video, we are going to start taking some of those pieces that we've learned and putting them together into a little bit larger project in this video and then the next several videos as well. So in this video, we're going to start off just by making a fairly basic UI using Android Jetpack Compose, and let's just jump right into it. So in your Android Studio window, go ahead and open a new project. We are going to do an empty compose activity. Make sure you select empty compose, not empty activity, but empty compose activity. Hit next, and we will name this book tracker, and I'm going to set it to Android 32. Now that that's finally loaded, we are going to go into our Gradle scripts and go into our build.gradle. We're going to upgrade this Compose UI version from 1.2.0, which is an older version. We're going to use 1.4.1. And then I'm going to switch this over to Kotlin 1.8.0 as well. And then in our build.gradle file at the module level, we are going to come in here. And this one, the Kotlin compiler extension version, I'm going to upgrade that to 1.4.0. And then all of these that are yellow down below, we're going to upgrade those as well. To do that, simply find this, you'll see this yellow light bulb off to the left, click on that, and we're going to change it to the newest version. So you can see here it's 1.7.0. Here we want to change it to 1.10.0. And then same thing on this line. Change to 2.6.1, change to 1.7.0, change to 1.4.1, and then all of these say Compose UI version, because in our build.gradle at the project level, we changed this Compose UI version field here. That is going to apply that value to each one of these. So all we need to do is hit sync now, and that's going to update everything. And the reason I'm doing all of this is because I think it's good practice always to use the latest stable version of everything unless you have a good reason not to. It'll help your code stay up to date longer. It'll help your code have a longer life cycle so you don't have to go back and rework things. So it's always a good idea to use the latest stable version of things unless you have a good reason not to. So now from here, if we come back, let's close out of these Gradle files. We don't need those anymore. If we come back into main activity, you can see here I've got my just generic composable greeting and my default preview down there. And then up here in our set content is where we're actually defining what that composable is going to look like when we actually install that on our app. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and make a new composable that we're going to use with our app. So if you come into your book tracker, which is our top level package, right click, do new Kotlin class or file, and we're going to do a new Kotlin file. And I'm going to call this book screen. Now within book screen, we're going to have our main composable function. So at composable, to mark this as a composable function. And then under that, fun book screen. And then I will go ahead and just set this up actually real quick in my main activity. So this book screen is going to be the full composable that we're going to call at the end. So if you come back to main activity, get rid of this greeting. We don't want that anymore. And then get rid of all of this stuff. Instead of that, and down here as well in the preview, we're just going to call that book screen composable function. So now if we would run our program, it would show us that composable that we have, which is of course empty because we haven't added any code to that yet. So let's get started on doing that. But first we are going to need some data. So essentially what this app is going to be, it's going to be a list of books and their information about the books. So like metadata, like the author and the genre and the published year and stuff like that. And then we are essentially going to make a reading list, and we can check off the books after we've completed them and do a couple other things. So to do that, we are going to need some data. We're going to need a list of books to add to our reading list. To get that list of books, what we're going to do in the future is we're going to set up a Firebase page and use a library called Retrofit to make an HTTP call to that Firebase page so that we can pull the data down into our app. But we are going to cover that much more in detail in a video in the future. Right now, what I'm going to do so that we can build up the UI and get this UI part working, because typically I like to do the UI first, just because it gives me something tangible that I can look at, and it makes me feel like I'm really making progress. So to do that, I'm just going to add in here some mock data or some dummy data. So within this new book screen Kotlin file, I'm going to make a new data class, and I'm just going to call it book. And then within that book, for now, we'll add more data when we get into using Firebase and Retrofit to pull that data down. But for now, we're going to have an ID on that book, which is just going to be an int. And then we're going to have a title so that we can know what book it is. That's going to be string because that'll be text. And then we are also going to have an author, and that will also be a string. And then after that, I'm going to make a list of books. So we're just going to call this mock book list. And it's going to be equal to a list of. And then in here, we are essentially going to have a bunch of books. So this line, I can just copy a bunch of times and then fill the data in afterwards. And now let's update all of those. And actually, I'm not going to do all of this right now. I'm just going to type this up and then resume the video. Now I have my list of books that we're going to use to actually populate my UI. And you can see, just like our data class, each book has an ID number, a title, and then an author, the writer of the book. So we can use this to populate our UI now. You're welcome to either pause the video here and type out this same list, or make up your own list with your own books. Or you can also just pause the video and go on over to the GitHub link in the description below, and you can copy this list straight from there. With that data, let's go ahead and start building our UI here. Essentially, we're going to have a list of all of these books, and each book is going to be contained within a card, and that card is going to have the text of the author and the title, as well as a check mark next to it to determine whether we've checked that book off or not. So in here, let's make a new composable function, and we'll mark that with the @composable annotation, and then a private function called book details. So the book details, we are going to store both our string, a string for the title, and then a string for the author of the book. So let's pass the string in for the title, and then another string for the author. And then we're going to pass a modifier in just so that we can change how this works from outside of the function as well. And in here, we are going to have a column. And inside that column, I'm going to pass that same modifier that we passed in from above. And you can tell here, because I'm using lowercase m, and up here it's also lowercase m, it highlights it too. If I were to do a capital M down here, that would create a new modifier. But because we want to be able to modify this column from outside, we want that to be the lowercase m so that it's the same as this modifier up here. Now within that column, we are going to need two text boxes. So the first one, we are going to set our text equal to title, and our font size is going to be equal to 24.sp. And after that, our second text field, we're going to set our text equal to the author, and then our font size is going to be equal to 20 sp. Now, one other thing that I want to do here, we have our two text fields. I want to highlight the top one when I look at it on my UI. So I want that to really stand out. Now, there's a couple different things that we can do that, and I'll show you two of them. First, we can change our font weight parameter. So if we set our font weight equal to either bold, or in this case, I'll do semi-bold, that's going to make that just pop out for your eyes a little bit more when you look at it. And then another thing that we can do is we can use something called a composition local provider. This one, not the context parameter. So a composition local provider is essentially a provider that allows us to take data and pass it down our composable hierarchy, which means we can pass data down all the way down to our text field. And in this case, what I'm going to use this to do is I'm going to gray out the text of the author so that when I look at this, my semi-bold title is what really stands out, because that's just going to help me see what book it is a lot quicker. So to do that, I'm going to pass in here local content alpha provides, and I'm going to say content alpha dot medium, which is going to give us a nice grayed out text on that author. And then after this, that's all that we need for our book details function. I'm going to do another composable function in here. This one is going to be just for a little icon that I put next to our book listing. So we're going to mark that with the @composable. This one's going to be a private function because we're only going to call it from within the parent function. It's going to be a book icon, and here I'm going to pass in an icon as an image vector, which is a image format, and then I'm going to pass that a modifier as well. Go ahead and import the image vector. And then within that function, I'm going to do an image. Within that image, go ahead and import that as well. So here, the newest compose image is this top one, but I'm actually going to use an older one, this bottom one here that has a line through it. And so you probably shouldn't do this on a production level product, but because this is just for learning purposes, now is a good time to tell you, anytime you see a line through something, that means that this is deprecated. So that's an older function, and that's no longer going to be supported in future Android releases. But I'm going to use it anyway, just for now, because it's easier for what I'm doing. But for production level products, you might not want to do that. And then I'm going to pass in my image vector icon. I'm also going to pass in a content description, which is like if somebody's blind and they hover their finger over it, this is the text that it's going to read to them. So we're just going to call that a book icon. And then a modifier equal to a modifier. And we're going to set the padding on that to 6 data pixels. And import everything, and that should be all that we need for our book icon composable function. So now I'm going to build a composable up above these two for our actual book item. So this, again, mark it with a composable annotation. Function book item, and we're going to pass a book into here. And then within this, I'm going to do a card, which a card is going to be essentially equal to the card view that we did back in XML. The card composable is going to be Compose's version of that, which means we can set our elevation and our shadow. So I'm going to set elevation to maybe 3 data pixels, should be plenty enough. And we are going to give that one a little bit of padding as well. So modifier equals modifier dot padding, maybe 8 data pixels should be good. And then within there, I am going to have a row. And within this row, again, make sure to import row and use the one that says compose.ui modifier. So within this row, we're going to give it some vertical alignment, and our vertical alignment is going to be equal to alignment dot center vertically, because we want it right in the middle. And then our modifier is going to be equal to modifier dot padding. We're going to give this one some padding too of 8 data pixels. And then within the body of that row, down here, I'm going to call my book icon composable. Now, within here, there's a series of icons that comes with Android Studio, and that's what we're going to use for our checkbox. So icons.default.check. So we'll go ahead and import icons and import check as well, and that's going to give us our checkbox, and then in that one a modifier as well. And we are going to give that a weight of 0.15 F, which means that's going to take up 15% of the allowed room of its parent's width. Essentially, it's going to take up 15% of that. And then after the book icon, we're going to have the book details within that same row. And for that, I'm going to pass the title of our book. I'm going to pass the author of our book. And then we're going to pass a modifier. And that modifier is going to have a weight of 85 dp. Or not 85 dp, 0.85 F rather. And that means that this, the details, is going to take up 85% of the allowed room, where the icon is going to take up 15% of the allowed room. So now we should be able to, well, let's go ahead and call our book item from up here. And we can hand it our mock book list. Let's just hand it the first book in there. And now if we take our book screen back at the main activity, let's go ahead and run that and see how it looks on our actual app. Now you can see here, this gives us our first book, The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. You can see the top is semi-bold, the title, and then the J.R.R. Tolkien, the author, it's not bold, and it's also a little grayed out thanks to that content provider that we used. But we only have one here, so we need to go back to our code, go back to our bookscreen.kotlin, and we need to fix this. Essentially, we're only doing the first item in our list, so I'm going to put these into a column. And I'm going to take this book item, place it within that column. Now, what we could do is within that column, we can just put like this, and we can go index 1, index 2, index 3, but that's going to be tedious and really not what we want to do. Instead, what we're going to do, we do for book in mock book list, and for each one of those, we're just going to call that book item function, and then we're going to pass it that book. So now, if I run that code, there we go. We've got our whole list. But the moment you start to interact with this, you realize that there's a big problem here. This doesn't move. It doesn't scroll at all. So this is something we need to fix. So coming into here, one thing we can do is our column. In our column, we can hand it a modifier. So modifier equals modifier dot vertical scroll, and then pass it remember scroll state. And essentially that remember scroll state, what that does is every time you move something on your screen, it's going to be recomposed. So all of the composables that are affected are going to be recomposed, and this remember scroll state is going to recompose it at the same scroll state that it was at before, so that you're not always going back to the beginning of the list. So now if I run that, it scrolls like it's supposed to. You've got your whole list there. So that's really what we want. But there's a better way to do this. Now with just 15 items in our list, it's not a problem. But later on, we are going to add a lot more books to this list. So it's going to get a lot longer. And essentially what happens here is your compose, it's going to compose everything within this column every time something moves. So if I scroll it a little bit, it's going to recompose all of these, even the ones that are way down here off the screen. So to avoid that, we're going to use something, instead of a column, we're going to use something called a lazy column. So I'm going to get rid of this modifier, and we're going to change our column to a lazy column. Go ahead and import that. Now with this lazy column, I'm going to hand it some content padding. We'll hand it padding values of vertical, maybe 8 should be fine, 8 data pixels vertically, and then horizontal, we'll hand it 6 data pixels, and that should be okay. And then down here, we are going to change this for loop into a lambda format, just because that's what you need to do for lazy column. So we're going to do items, and we're going to do our mock book list. And then within that mock book list, for each book, we are going to do the following. We're just going to call that same book item composable that we created before. And if you're running into this error here, where it says type mismatch, required book found int, that's because we're missing an import up above. I don't know why it doesn't pick this up. Hopefully they fix that in a future version, but import androidx.compose.foundation.lazy.items. And now you can see that's fixed that. So if I run this code again, it does the same thing. So we've got our scrollable list, and it's got everything within our mock data displayed here. And the big benefit of this now, that after we change that, is with the lazy column, it's only going to compose all of the composables that are displayed on the screen right now. Which means, so here, for everything after War and Peace, everything down here that we don't see right now, if you look in our mock data list, you could see there's all of these books listed after number 8, War and Peace, which means all of these aren't going to be recomposed every time. And again, this isn't a big deal when we have only index 0 through 15, so we have 16 items here. But if we had 100 or 200 or 1,000 items in this list, this would be a big problem, having to recompose all of those on every recomposition. So the lazy column is definitely better for sets of data where you're going to have a lot of data and a lot of entries, whereas just the quick scrollable column is okay for a set of data where you're only going to have either a small limited set where it's not going to change a whole lot, and it doesn't have the possibility of expanding beyond that. Hopefully this video has been helpful and you've been able to follow along with what we've done fairly easily. Go ahead and join us in the next video. Next time we're going to be looking at this checkbox over here. You can see it's there, but I can't actually click it, so they're all just checked by default. Next time we're going to talk about state and how we can handle that, and we're going to talk about using a view model specifically with Jetpack Compose to handle state. So join us for that. Hopefully you learn a lot there too. We'll see you in the next video.